everyone in my generation knows someone directly or knows of someone who has been impacted by a hate crime or gun violence or some sort of act of horrific violence or situational circumstances. Whether it be something as big and globally impactful as 9/11, whether it is something like the Charleston Massacre that happened to my father, or if it's something like knowing somebody who was impacted in gang violence or a random one-off shooting that happened in a back alleyway. I have not encountered a single person in my generation who doesn't know someone who has been impacted by that. And that causes a different way of existing in the world.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to At Our Table. I'm your host, Jamie Harrison. And today I'm joined by Eliana Pinckney, the eldest daughter of my friend, the late South Carolina State Senator and Reverend Clementa Pinckney. While leading a Bible study class at Mother Emanuel AME Church in historic downtown Charleston, Senator Pinckney and 8 of his parishioners were brutally murdered on June 18, 2015. They were murdered because of the color of their skin, by racists who wanted to start a race war. The world knows this tragedy as the Charleston Massacre. At the time, I was the chair of the South Carolina Democratic Party, and I will never forget that evening, getting that call, dropping to my knees, weeping in my wife's arms. Clem was a friend, he was a mentor, and a role model for so many of us. Eliana, it has been incredible to watch you and your sister grow into confident and accomplished young women. And I am so grateful that you are here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I am incredibly honored to be here and to have the opportunity to speak with you for a little bit today.
When people see you who knew your dad, what do they tell you about him?
I hear so many stories about my dad, the person that he was. Most commonly, though, I hear a lot about how his energy and presence still lives on and is present in me and my sister, which is something that I feel like I knew at a very young age. My dad and I were almost like two peas in a pod. We could talk about literally anything. Um, Most of my memories are of him treating me as what felt like being treated as an adult when I was like 8 and 9. Um, but our conversations never lacked emotional maturity, and he never bowed down to talk to me about some of the more serious topics of things. So when he left, I had that same strong vigor to engage in conversations of that sort of intellectual stimulation. So after he died, a lot of conversations were about how much of him was still left in me. And a lot of what I learned about my dad and I'm still learning about my dad, people are inspired to tell me based off of other conversations that I've had with them individually. Whether it's about how he was as a kid and how involved he was in the arts before he entered into a world of politics and religious service, or things that he fought about and cared about on the Senate floor, or how he connected his political life to his religious service. But I'm always shocked at how much of it people are always able to tie back to me and my sister. And it's nice to know that we are some sort of version of him as we enter into our adult lives that maybe we didn't get to see as much when we were younger.
When you think back to the conversations, the adult type conversations that you had with him, what were some of his hopes for you and for your family? What were some of the things that he told you that he wanted to see for South Carolina?
Yeah, in terms of my sister and I especially, my dad and my mom always made it very clear that they wanted us to be self-assured and confident women who were able to stand on our own 2 feet no matter what society or the world threw at us. It was very important to my mom and dad that, of course, family comes first, but that we would be able to live and evolve in a society where we could be completely independent and not necessarily need to rely on anyone. So my dad was especially sure that he gave me and my sister as many tools as we could. Little did we know at the time that we would have to live the rest of our lives and go into adulthood without having him there to be able to guide us through all of those things. But while he was here, he prepared us for a life without him that we didn't know we were being prepared for at the time, which I'm so eternally thankful for. But in a more grand scheme of things, my the one thing that I feel like my dad loved more than his family and his religion was service and serving the
Mm.
people of South Carolina and giving back to people that he didn't even know. He led with the same kind of compassion and love and treated them like family. So I think that similarly to his goals for my sister and I, he dreamed of seeing a South Carolina and a world where everyone was able to stand on their own 2 feet, and everyone had access to all of the things that they needed, whether it was healthcare, whether it was equality and equal access to education, of an affordable living situation. Like, he stood so strongly on making sure that he could do anything in his power to make sure that was possible for people in his immediate family and also for all of the people that he represented.
So I want to go back to that day, that awful, awful day. You were 11 years old. What do you remember?
Um, at the time, I still, like I am to this day, am a dancer, and I was in the middle of what felt like the most intense dance thing I had ever been a part of in my life. And my dad had picked me up from dance, and he told me very simply that he had to go to Charleston for Bible study that night, and he asked me if I wanted to go. And I was like, "Well, is my sister going?" And he was like, "I don't know, we'll ask her." And my sister decided that she wanted to go, which at 11 years old made the decision very simple for me to decide to stay at home with my grandma. Um,
It sounds like my 2 boys.
yeah, especially at that age, and my sister and I are so close now, but at the time, I was like, "If I could stay at home alone with grandma, I'm gonna stay at home
Yes.
alone with grandma." So they winded up going to Charleston that night, and I was at home chilling, acting like nothing was going on because I didn't know there was anything going on. Stayed up past my bedtime watching Boy Meets World, and I was up long enough to hear the doorbell ring in the middle of the night. Um, and my grandma answered the door, and it was a very close family friend who also has passed, Joe Neal. And he came and he got my grandma and I, and they took us to Charleston, and that's where we met up with the rest of my family and all of the other families, and that's when they told us that my dad had passed. Yeah, and immediately after that, it was a whirlwind of chaos and media and grief and all of these things that you don't really know what to do with at 11.
Yeah.
Um Because I knew that my dad was important, and I knew that he was going to work every day and that he was serving all of these people, but my mom's an educator, so in my head, my mom was also going to work every day and serving all of these people, and the concept of people that didn't actually know my dad caring about my dad, or people that I didn't know knew my dad caring about my dad, was something that I didn't really understand or know what to do with at the time, but it was helpful for me to know and inspiring for me to know that the world saw my dad in the same way that I did,
Yeah.
and that there was no, like, push for, "Oh, we're grieving a person because it's a national event." We're grieving not only my dad, but the other 8 people who lost their lives for the genuineness of their soul and the spirit and energy that they put out in the world. Like, that is a detrimental loss that everyone was feeling.
When I think about your dad, I think about somebody who embodied the power of love, and that love exuded through his service. When your dad spoke, it emoted with love and caring and being a bigger person, and being a helpful person, and so, I mean, it really hit many of us so hard, and I think it hit the nation hard. One of the things I wonder, what have you come to understand about that day that you could not understand when you were 11?
I think the older I've gotten, especially since high school and now graduating college, I understand the fact that it's not only the person that my dad was, but also the magnitude of the event and the seriousness of the event. That, yes, my dad was a wonderful person and a senator and a pastor who represented all of these people, and losing a life of that magnitude is horrible, and that will capture so many people. But what actually captured the world and the people that didn't know him was the fact that a picture of innocence, 9 innocent people at a church in complete peace, not causing any harm to anyone, could be murdered in such a brutally hateful way. That kind of hate and violence wasn't something that I necessarily understood the magnitude of the situation at the time, because the situation to me was my dad and the
Yeah.
people that I saw every Sunday at church, not a hate crime, not something that spoke a bigger message about race and hate and violence and gun control in this country, that I now that I'm older, I just understand so much more clearly, and I am so much more passionate about, and I'm able to connect the dots between this happening to my dad and the irony of just a couple moments before my dad being on the Senate floor talking about the Walter Scott shooting and the racism behind that and the gun violence behind that, that I didn't know that that's what my dad was talking about at the time. I just was like, dad's going to work and he's telling people to get their life together. But now seeing that those situations happened less than 3 months apart from each other, and that things like this are happening multiple times a year across this country, and the severity of that and the genuine problem behind that are things that at 11 years old, you just can't understand. That I definitely understand a lot more clearly now.
I also wanna spend some time talking about your mom
Yeah.
because, I cannot, as a parent myself, I can't fathom being in that situation and then being there for your 2 young kids, being there to be a spokesperson, for your family, being there in the midst of all of this chaos and losing the love of your life and being that strong pillar. Tell us a little bit about your mom and what role your mom played in terms of, Jennifer is an amazing person,
Yeah.
and she was not the one in the spotlight, but really, was the foundation of your family. Talk a little bit about your mom and how your mom helped you and your sister during this time.
Yeah. I My dad gets all of the flowers and the spotlight and the red carpet and all of these things, but like you said, like, my mom really is the pillar behind everything. Um, Back when my dad was alive, she was the pillar behind him, the person who
Mhm.
was always encouraging him to take the next step, to represent as many people as possible, to run for office again and all of those things. And being a senator is already a big task. Being a preacher is already a big task, but to be doing both of those things at the same time across the entire state, there is an element of, no matter how present of a person you are, you can't always be there.
Yeah.
And my mom, without a doubt, was always there. So she is such a powerhouse in a way that I definitely didn't know and appreciate when I was younger. And then after my dad died, to see her step into the responsibility of not only being a single parent in a completely unexpected way, but also to see her do everything in her power to keep alive my dad's legacy and mission and intentions by pushing herself out of her comfort zone to
Yeah.
do the interviews, to do the press conferences, or whatever the situation is, was so inspiring to me. Her doing that work is the reason that I think that my sister and I have a legacy to continue to care about and to continue to live on, and is the reason that my dad is not something that we just remember and think about like, "Oh, remember when dad used to take us here and used to do these things?" But she is the reason that we know my dad to be the political force and icon that other people acknowledge him as. Because she was determined to not let his work die alongside with him, and she was determined to continue to intellectually stimulate my mind and to encourage my sister and I to go and do the work and learn the things that my dad would encourage us to do. And she did it all so gracefully. There are so many people I remember right after my dad died comparing my mom to Coretta Scott King,
Yeah.
which, again, at 11, it's like we know MLK, we learn about MLK in school, but you rarely learn about the woman who is the backbone behind the mission. And getting to watch my mother become that backbone, not just for our family, but for the communities surrounding us. And to watch her always do that with her head held high, despite her own shyness or not public facing naturally persona, has been so incredibly inspiring in a wonderful way.
Well, she's an inspiring person, and I love that analogy to her and Mrs. King, and she has that strength and that grace, and it's really amazing to see what she has done, not only for your dad's legacy, but to do what she has done to make sure that you and your sister grew up knowing who you are, what you are, and the power that you have, and that's a testament to who she is. Please make sure you let her know that we are so grateful for her and so thankful for her, stepping into that moment.
Yeah, I will,
Um,
absolutely.
it's been 10 years now. You recently graduated from college,
I did.
and you mentioned dancing. You're a performer. Tell us
Yeah.
about the performances and the shows that you have been a part of. Tell us about your life today. What is Eliana Pinckney doing today?
Yeah, that is the $1,000,000 question that people are always interested to hear about. Um, yeah, so I moved out of South Carolina and went to Temple University in Philadelphia for college, and I got my degree in musical theater, which was the plot twist that a lot of people weren't expecting, I will say. But I my parents put me in dance, like I said, at a very young age. The arts have always been a part of my life. But art to me is my vessel and my way of doing the work that my father cared so passionately about. As great and interesting as it maybe could be to run for office or for me to spend my Sundays behind a pulpit, I don't think that in this moment that's what my intentions are. That's not why God has me here. So I decided to get my degree and study musical theater, and now I work and perform in Philadelphia. And I'm thankful that Philadelphia has such a strong and vibrant artistic community, and the pillars of which are supported by the cultural background and diversity that exists in Philadelphia. So I'm very fortunate to be a part of and to produce and act and choreograph in work that centers Black and brown bodies or talks about social issues that, if I were in office, would also be speaking about. And I'm just using my voice and my talents to convey that message to a different type of audience than maybe behind a pulpit like my father would have done, or on the Senate floor like my dad would have done as well. Um, and it's been incredible to discover this way of artistic activism, and to have conversations with people after shows who are like, "I didn't realize that these are experiences that Black and brown people go through to this day, or I didn't understand how poverty was impacting things, or LGBTQ issues, or all of these other things, immigration, etc., etc. Being able to connect with people in that way through art and make them leave the theater having conversations with their family and stuff like that is exactly what gives me so much joy and encourages me to keep pursuing this career path.
Well, in the Black community, there's been a long tradition of blending art and activism. I mean,
Mhm.
you can look throughout the '60s and the '70s, and you look at the fight for civil rights, and some of the leading activists were artists. They were musicians, they were
Yeah.
singers, they were artists, they were writers, and so you were walking in that great tradition. What do you see the future is for you? What would you as you think about your art, and you think about your passions in terms of, fighting for civil rights and equal rights, what would be the perfect blend for you to do that? If you see something out there now and say, "That's exactly what I wanna do with my life."
Yeah, that's also such a really good question. I like to identify as a multi-hyphenate in the sense that I artistically am a person who can hold many hats, and I, as a person, am a person who holds many hats. So when I look to my future and what I want to become of my career, there's so many different outcomes that would provide me the same amount of joy and catharsis. There's a world that I would love to open up a dance studio and provide a place for people, especially students of color, to be able to train and have the same sort of educational experience and opportunity to practice their art that I had. There's a world that I would love to create shows and to choreograph and direct shows and write shows that tell the stories of marginalized communities across this country and connect with people that way. There's a world that in 30 years from now, I decide that I want to put art on the back burner and run for office and make change and impact the world in that sort of way. I'm passionate about all of those things as long as I'm doing something where I can give back to my community and make sure that people are leaving a space with me better than they entered it or are thinking about things in a more critical lens that maybe they weren't before, I'm doing exactly what I wanna do.
That is beautiful, and, that's the thing that I tell a lot of young people. Just do the things that you're passionate about, and everything else will fall into place. Life will lead you down the road that you need to go down, and as long as you follow that passion and the calling and what's true to who you are, it will all fall into place and everything will all be okay. And so it's
Yeah,
great to hear that that's really that's your guiding light in terms of where you end up.
yeah,
And we know it's whatever you're going to do when you're doing it because it's your passion, you're going to do it well. You're going to excel,
exactly.
and you're going to make such a big impact and a big difference. I saw one interview, or read in an interview in which you said and you described yourself as a part of the 9/11 generation and, part of a generation shaped by gun violence. Um, what did you mean by that, and how has that shaped your worldview?
Yeah, everyone and I feel like it's a safe assumption to say that everyone in my generation knows someone directly or knows of someone who has been impacted by a hate crime or gun violence or some sort of act of horrific violence or situational circumstances. Whether it be something as big and globally impactful as 9/11, whether it is something like the Charleston Massacre that happened to my father, or if it's something like knowing somebody who was impacted in gang violence or a random one off shooting that happened in a back alleyway. I have not encountered a single person in my generation who doesn't know someone who has been impacted by that. And that causes a different way of existing in the world. Not necessarily a world where I would say that we all live in fear, but there is a different element of awareness and on guardness that I think comes with being a part of this generation. There is an element of looking over your shoulder or a desensitization to major things that maybe past generations would have viewed each of them as being these equally horrific crimes, and take time off of work and we lower the flags to half mast and we pray about these families. Our generation grew up in a world where there were too many things. There are multiple things happening each week, that there is an element of, oh my gosh, this just is the world that we live in. It's not, oh, poor person, this happened, and we can kind of say, oh, that happens over there. That doesn't happen in our neighborhood. That doesn't happen to people like us, because it genuinely surrounds us. But with that said, with all of that negativity, I think that because of that, our generation has a similar and strong fight to the people that the generations from the civil rights movement had, of like, we are so aware of the state of the world that there is a sense of, okay, we need to wake up and actively take part in our democracy and take part in shaping the world to be what we want it to be, because of all of these other situations we've been surrounded by.
You know, I've struggled with this because the question is, how do we react to the cycle? After every major shooting, we hear same thoughts and prayers, the same social media posts, yet leaders don't do anything. And I look at the various generations, right? And, again, there's some folks who are like, well, we just got to pray and things will get better. You get some folks like, well, we need to be active and we need to get rid of these politicians, or we need to do this and that. And then you get some people who have just, I think, almost have become desensitized, right? That they've almost built up this callus where it's just, it is what it is. I just need to be careful with the situation I'm in and the people that I love. I mean, do you think that we will ever break this cycle in this country? And if so, how?
Yeah, I, in maybe a blissfully optimistic lens, am choosing to believe that things will change. I don't necessarily have one specific answer to that change, because
Mhm.
if there were a specific answer to any of the problems that we nationally face, it would have all been solved. We live in a democracy that is meant to represent a wide multitude of people, and there is no one singular solution that will allow all of those people to be happy and feel like they're represented. But I do think, at least from what I'm assuming of the people that I know in this generation, there is an element of things are happening so often we can become desensitized to that. But there also is the awareness now that it doesn't necessarily it's not enough to say, oh, I'm just going to avoid those situations, because those situations are now unavoidable. People are getting shot and murdered in churches, in schools, in libraries, in public spaces that we all have interacted with at some point in our lives. So the desensitization doesn't necessarily come from a complacency. I think that it comes from, we've seen this so much and we're tired of it. But there is also, in that same regard, an element of, what can I do? Where I feel like we are taught that political action, the only way to make political change is if you're in office. And the only way that we can participate in that democracy is by voting. So there is an element of, okay, well, I'm not going to go to the march. I'm not going to go to the protest. I'm not going to write my elected officials. I'm not going to give the phone calls, because my voice doesn't matter in those spaces. When in reality, I think there needs to be a resurgence that we had in 2020, that we had in the civil rights movement, where the fight does not stop. The fight doesn't always necessarily have to be a 24/7, this is what I do for my life. It doesn't have to mean that I'm in office making all of these changes by myself and signing the bills and the papers. But the fight, honestly, is enough to have the conversations with your neighbors to say, hey, this is still going on, or to go to your community centers and to volunteer, or to try to do things in your own community and in your own backyard to prevent the violence, to cause more of a sense of an awareness, to rebuild that sense of community. I think that genuine change happens when communal values are strong. And that doesn't mean that nationwide we all have to feel and believe the same thing, but no fight gets won individually. There's so much power in numbers, and I think that I really believe, perhaps optimistically, that we will start to see genuine change if we can get masses of people to come together and find some sort of way to speak proudly and boldly about the changes that we want to see.
Well, I that was really, really fantastic.
Thank you.
And I tell you, I can't wait until you decide that one path and you do decide that you wanna run because it is that type of passion that we need right now in politics and optimism, to be quite honest. I mean, I listen, Ileana, I can't hide my frustration with some of the politicos here in South Carolina, just over the last few years after the death of your dad, and we had the legislation to close the Charleston loophole. Charleston loophole played a role in how the man who killed Clem and the other 8 gained his access to a gun. And we had the legislation in the House. I think it passed the House at one point, and then it got bottled up in the Senate
Yeah,
by our own senator. Graham did not support it. Sad to say, but every anniversary of the Charleston Massacre, and he'll send out his tweet or something to that extent.
right,
That just makes me boiling mad. It really does, because this is about protecting the lives of folks in our communities, our fellow citizens. And, what's the value of that life as opposed to some special interest group who doesn't want the loophole to be
right.
closed? Have you had any conversations with some of the electeds in Washington, D.C. About closing the Charleston loophole?
I have not had any direct
Yeah.
conversations like the ones we're having now, but that is something that I am looking forward to having soon, very, very soon, because performative activism is
Mm.
such a very, very strong and very, very alive thing, especially in political sectors. It is something that I find often happens in red states where there is a large Black and brown population or a large marginalized population, where politicians will say the bare minimum of what they need to say to show or to prove that they have some sort of empathy surrounding a situation that they know other people care about, but then in policy and in actual action not do anything to support that, which I also find to be incredibly frustrating. Yeah, incredibly frustrating is actually the only term that I have for it. And the
Well,
fact
it
of
is. It is
yeah,
frustrating.
the fact of the
And
matter is that some people are gonna feel this way and some people aren't gonna change their opinions on certain things. But with that, there has to be an element of not allowing there to be complacency in saying, okay, if this is the choice you're gonna make, then I need you to look in my eyes as you're making that choice, knowing that my money isn't supporting you and that maybe money is the reason that you're driving your decisions, but here's the real life person that this is impacting. And not just me, but the hundreds of thousands of people across South Carolina and the millions of people in the United States that these choices impact every day. There's a lack of humanization in performative activism that I find comes from politicians often that I really want to do everything in my power to sort of bridge the gap between.
The dehumanization that I see in politics, I think you're spot on this. This isn't just about policy. There's real people and real impacts on the other side of it. It's not about
Yeah,
just going to the floor of the Senate or the House and making a speech and, having a reception with some special interest group or doing a rally. There are real ramifications for and real impacts on the day-to-day lives of people. And I sort of get a sense that in politics today that some people have lost that because they're no longer connected. They no longer have a finger on the pulse of people. They're no longer hearing from folks. They're hiding behind, we'll do teletown halls where we screen who can ask questions and, I won't do an in-person town hall. All of those things have gotten lost in politics, and as a result of it, I
right.
I believe, it shields the politicians from the passions of the people, and therefore, they don't always make the right decisions.
Right. I completely
Yeah.
agree. And my dad laid such a strong example for me. Um, because there were so many memories that I have of going with my dad to random churches or random people's houses. And at like 8 years old, I would be like, okay, but who are these people? If it's not family, I don't want to be here. But he genuinely had such a strong understanding of the fact that the only reason I'm holding this office is to represent these people.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
not for any sort of ulterior motive. It's not for money. It's not for financial gain. It's not for publicity. But the job of the politician is to represent the people. Politicians should not be celebrities. These are not people that we're idolizing and randomly throwing money at so they can wear cute outfits and go to press conferences and do all these things. It's your job to represent the people. And at a certain point, that gets lost because the fame of having the power can get to one's head and kind of disconnect them from the grassroots connections and reasons that they theoretically should have run for in the first place. And I feel as though all of our, not all, that's a really large blanket statement, but a lot of our political problems could be solved they if politicians at large got back in touch with their roots and understood that they are representing the people and not the product or the corporation or the money or where their publicity and promotion is coming from.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, you voted in your first presidential election in 2024, November 2024. Tell me
Yeah.
what that was like.
That was a very interesting experience. Um,
And did you vote in Pennsylvania or South Carolina?
in Pennsylvania.
Oh, so
Um,
battleground Pennsylvania.
Battleground Pennsylvania, but I am fortunate to live in this liberal bubble that is Philadelphia.
Yeah.
Um, and going to a liberal arts college, getting a performance arts degree, I mean, it quite literally cannot get further to the left than I have been in these last 4 years. So it was a very interesting feeling to go from being surrounded by all of these people who were very pro-blue in every way. It is such a utopia that obviously has problems of its own and no environment
Mhm.
is perfect, but to be in this area where it's like we all value human rights and we all want affordable housing and for a decline in the homelessness population and all of these things that we are all seemingly on the same page about. So to be so confident that an election can turn out one way and then to see that not be the way that things go at all kind of forced not only me, but everyone in my community to realize, like, whoa, we're in this small little pocket of the world that is not at all clearly representative of how the entirety of America feels. So I will say that it was initially a bit of a culture shock, but unfortunately became a sad anticipated revelation after growing up in South Carolina in a
Yeah.
very, very red state,
Yeah.
um, there was an element of like, wow, it's crazy how much you can assume that people will change in 4 years, but it's not even necessarily that people are changing. I changed my environment and my surroundings. Um, and since then, it has kind of made me tiptoe out of this utopia and be more boots on the ground and aware of things that are happening outside of Philly and reconnect with what's going on back at home and reconnect with what's happening in other pockets of the country and be forced to kind of confront the realities of our political climate.
Well, a lot of folks say the sleeping giant in American politics right now is actually your generation.
Yeah,
You are the largest voting bloc in the country, but the lowest performing voting bloc in the country. What
yeah.
do you think your generation needs to hear? What will motivate them, engage them, and ignite their belief in democracy? And I know your generation is very different from, say, my generation and your dad's generation, which I think as Gen Xers, we were the last generation that was, I'm a Democrat because my mama and my daddy were Democrats, right? Or the
Yeah,
same thing, like I'm a Baptist because my mom and my daddy were Baptists, and my
right.
whereas your generation is, you all are about your feelings and your values, and you don't really give a damn about about the
Yeah.
institution so much. So, but what do you think the key is to motivating and engaging your generation to wake up that sleeping giant?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this question specifically could not have been more perfectly timed because we saw a resurgence of political care in the most recent New York mayoral elections. And that care, in my opinion, happened because for the first time in a very long time, I feel, we as a generation and we as a society were able to see the person behind the politics, to really be able to connect with the fact that yes, there is a political system, and yes, there is an institution and a way that things work, and of course, change won't happen overnight, but to genuinely know and trust that there is somebody who is willing to know your name, meet you where you're at, be completely transparent about what's happening in this big political system that a lot of us don't even really understand. Like, and I think a big generational difference is now, like when I was in school, government was not a required class.
Mhm.
We It's a class that is an option that you can take, but it's not required. So if you aren't being forced to take it and you aren't from a background where you have an interest in politics, you really don't know how the system works. And if the only knowledge you have is that the government didn't give you this check or the government isn't standing up for these things, then it creates a really strong distrust of the government. And why am I going to participate in a system that seemingly has no benefit for me? There's an overall lacking of caring about political ideology and political systems among this generation because there's such strong distrust. But centering the human first before the system is what this generation seems to be most attracted to, myself included. Like, I want to vote for a politician that doesn't view politics necessarily as their job, but more so this is their duty and they have a life outside of their politics and they aren't just a person who seems to be the face of a corporation that's giving them a lot of money. And that's not to say that that has only been found in the most recent mayoral election. I think that this New York election was the most connected that our generation has been able to be to a politician through the usage of social media or networking in areas that a lot of young people frequent. I think that that worked very well in his favor. But at the end of the day, being able to see the person behind the system is what our generation values that maybe we feel like we don't have enough of.
You put your finger on something that I really do believe is at the core of why politics has become toxic here. If you don't understand how government works, if you don't understand the structure of government, it is so easy to be frustrated by it.
Yeah,
Because it is slow. It is like turning a battleship. It is a slow process. It is not, it is not always clear about how things operate and how work. Sometimes you think that a certain system is somebody playing games, but it's just the way that the system's designed to work.
right.
Um, and I think the biggest frustration is like if your expectations are here, but the reality of how things work are there, they never meet, right?
Yeah.
You're always going to have that gap, and when you have that gap, you're going to have frustrations, you're going to have anger, you're going to have distrust.
Mhm.
And I think that that is really at the core of why American politics is so dysfunctional right now. We got a lot of people walking around here today who just don't know what government is supposed to
Yeah.
do, right? They don't know how it is supposed to work, and when you don't know that, you get very frustrated with it, and then you say a pox on all their houses, both the
Mhm.
Democrats and the Republicans. They're all corrupt. They're all crooked. But really, the core issue and the problem is, and that's not to say that there aren't crooked people involved in politics, because they are. There are crooked people everywhere. But the real issue and problem is not understanding fundamentally how these things work and how they should work together. Because when
Yeah.
you know how they work, then you can hold people accountable to when they are not working.
Yeah. I 100% agree, and I think that with that, there's something that I admire as somebody who does not currently hold office, with the understanding of leading with transparency no matter what. But I think what happens is the frustration comes from high promises, high expectations during a campaign, and then once the election happens and once you hold that position, there is radio silence, and you objectively, as the general body that is the politician, not you specifically, are involved in the inner workings of Congress and the House and the Senate and whatever position you may hold. And there is not that same through line of communication that we as the people got during the process. So we don't all have the understanding of how politics work because it's not required in our education system or for whatever reasons. But even though it's not 100% on the politician to be our educator, I certainly think that it doesn't do a disservice for the politician to say, here's why you aren't seeing the change that you want to see this fast, or here's how the system works.
Well, I think in today's politics, you have to educate. You have to teach. Part of leading at this point is to assume that people don't understand and that they don't know. And so, therefore, every step of the way, if you're going to make a promise about doing A, B, and C, then you have to teach people then how you will go about getting A, B, and C accomplished.
Exactly.
And you just have to do that. You can't assume that people know or understand because that basis of understanding, that basis of knowledge, that teaching of American civics no longer is a requirement, and so I think you're spot on that just has to be a part of the responsibility of being a leader, being someone who runs for politics these days, that you're
Yeah.
teaching them along the way.
Yeah. I completely agree.
So, Eliana, you serve on the board of the Pinckney Foundation, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about the foundation and the work that you specifically do?
Absolutely. As a board member of the foundation, we do a lot of really important work surrounding the districts in South Carolina that my dad represented. Um, I personally have headed up our annual back to school book bag bash, where we provide book bags, school supplies, and help people register for school all across the districts that my dad used to represent. And the last couple of years, we've set them up with utilities and internet access and all sorts of things like that. And in this next upcoming year, I'll be heading some more politically centered projects that are all going to be nonpartisan, but really about helping people be more civically active and learn a lot more about the way that our government works and all the inner workings of those things.
Well, let me sign up. I want to be helpful in that process, whatever I can do, because you're right. Clem believed in that. He believed in civic responsibility and civic awareness. Getting people registered to vote and educated about voting and what the issues were. All those things are really big parts of his passion, and so
Yeah.
it's great to hear that in the next wave of what the foundation is going to focus on. It's going to focus on that civic activism and education. I think it is spot on, and it's so needed in South Carolina right now.
Yeah.
It is so needed. So many people, again, going back to not understanding, and I think when you don't understand, you get frustrated, and so therefore you kind of decide, well, I don't know how that works, and so I'm just not gonna get involved, and then you leave that up to other people to make decisions about you, and they may not share your same values, they may not share your same outlook,
Yeah.
and so it's really, really important to increase that. Again, not for any partisan purposes, just to be an American, and understanding how our system works and how it should work for you and your family and your community. I think that's really, really
Exactly.
important. Eliana, as I think about the conversation that we've had, you are so optimistic. You have so much hope. As someone who has seen so much and has gone through so much at such an early age, where does that hope and optimism come from?
Yeah. I think while I and a lot of people in my generation have been through a lot of really horrible things, there have also been a lot of really incredible things that we have to look forward to and have to be inspired by. I mean, my generation was the first generation to live through a Black president. For that to be one of the first presidents of our childhood is incredible and inspirational in its own regard. But I think even on a more personal level, we have the ability to be more outspoken and more connected than any generation previously has been. And I think in that, there is a light at the end of the tunnel of even if the people that are elected to represent us aren't necessarily holding the same ideals that we have, we are able to kind of build our own communities, whether it's through social media or through college networking or things that previous generations just didn't have such instant access to. So there is more of a communal sense that helps keep the optimism alive, being able to celebrate the small wins and victories. We were talking earlier about Mandami, and 50 years ago, that would have been an election that only the people in New York talked about and only the people in New York celebrated. But now people across the world can celebrate how historically monumental this victory is. And if we can see it happening in New York, there's no reason to say it can't also happen in Philly or it can't also happen in South Carolina. And those little victories across the country, I feel like, are what keeps the optimism and the spark alive.
You know, every episode we give out very special award. We call it the "Sit Your Ass Down" award, and the recipient is someone who you may just be tired of hearing from, either on your social media feed, on TV, or in day to day life. And so, as a guest at our table, this episode, you get the opportunity to pick. So I don't know if you thought about it, but Eliana, who would you like to present this week's Sit Your Ass Down award to?
I want to be very clear that I am speaking on behalf of myself and not the Clementa Pinckney Foundation or anyone else in my family, even though we might share the same sentiment. Um, but I would like to humbly give this award to our current sitting president, Donald Trump, for a multitude of reasons,
Yes.
but specifically because regardless of any presidential policy that any president has made, the president is a figurehead for the American people.
Yes.
And there have been more conversations, I feel, in the last year about people being embarrassed to be an American, about people wanting to leave the country, and all of these things that are really disheartening to hear, that I feel like have not happened in such strong magnitudes before. But I will personally say that our president is an embarrassment and says things without any sort of political decorum or control or external thought about how his actions or words can impact the entirety of our nation and how they make our government and political process work, which I think a lot of his actions are a big part of why my generation doesn't have trust or faith or believe in the system anymore. So I think his actions are more detrimental than anything else, which is why I would tell him to sit his butt down, and he deserves that award.
So, President Donald J. Trump, you are this week's recipient of the Sit Your Ass Down Award.
Yeah. Yeah. But hey, I'd love to sit down and have a conversation with him too. So I would say the same
Well,
things to his face.
that'll be an interesting conversation. But
Very, very interesting.
yeah. Well, Eliana, let me say this as we close. I'm sure you hear this often, but I want to say it clearly. I see so much of your father in you, so much of your mother in you. Their strength, their grace, their integrity. And I know that they are both proud of you. And I know your dad is watching you with a huge smile on his face.
Thank you.
And so I know your mom, Jennifer, is cheering you on every step of the way. But before we go, please tell people where they can learn more about the Pinckney Foundation.
Yes, you can look us up at our website, theclementapinckneyfoundation.org. And we are also on Instagram and Facebook. Our socials are getting a nice new revamp for 2026. So you can follow us there, also at the Clementa Pinckney Foundation, for more updates about all of the things that you're doing, where you can donate and support for our future endeavors and stuff like that.
Well, thank you again so much for being a part of At Our Table. Thank you for the wonderful conversation. And again, I am so proud of you and all that you are doing and accomplishing, and the legacy that you are not only continuing the legacy of your father, but you are blazing your own legacy of art and activism. And again, you do us all proud here in South Carolina. So thank
Thank
you
you
for
so much.
being at our table.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
If you enjoyed today's show, please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Follow us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, or anywhere you find your podcasts. To be the first to know who will be at our table next, be sure to subscribe to our Substack on jamieharrison.substack.com. At Our Table with Jamie Harrison is a production of Vision Blue Media. Our founding executive producers are Jason Hyder and Jamie Harrison. Our producers are Kyle Kelly and Emily Harrell. Our content consultants are Ernie Grigg and Clay Middleton. Our digital communications are led by Lauren Brown. Courtney Reimer of Sounds Great Strategies is our creative consultant. Title sequence by Tom Hunt. Our theme song, Blonde Gone, is written by Dewey and published by Alibi Music Library. Very special thanks to Eliana Pinckney and the Pinckney Foundation. I'm Jamie Harrison, and I look forward to another conversation at our table.